thing, the Gorgo, die griechische Rachegöttin, das können Sie besser übersetzen, das Symbol, diese Mythologie, die griechische Mythologie.
This is a symbol for the goddess of revenge.
Ja, die Gorgo verfolgt den Täter bis zum Schluss.
Yeah, it will hunt down the victim. This is the symbol of revenge. They will find the culprit and sort of hunt him down to the end. Houses or courtrooms, there is a crucifix or there's a cross, actually usually without a corpse on the cross, but in this room, exceptionally, it does have a corpse. The room hasn't been actually kept as a museum or in the shape it had during the IMT trial. So for the entire American occupation zone, in this building, in this courthouse, there was an infrastructural center because they had already implanted so many technical things for the trial. So they kept this as a basis for distributing food and other things throughout their entire occupational zone. Even after being actually occupational zone after the foundation of the Federal Republic. And because this courthouse was occupied by the American army, the courts, the actual German judges were sort of distributed all over the city in 17 different places where they had their courts. And so the Bavarian government was quite keen on getting back this building to have again a single courthouse. And this east wing of the entire Palace of Justice was the first that was handed back to the Bavarian authorities.
In 1916.
In 1916. So, as this part was being handed back to the Bavarian authorities and to being a court, one desperately needed a big room to hold trials, to continue with the justice system, the German justice system. And so this room was just being put back to its original shape, which had not been used since the end of the follow-up trials. So for 10, 12 years it was not used, it was just an empty spot. So one desperately needed a courtroom, and as this was there, one sort of started to hold trials in this room again. And maybe also at that time one was not sensitive enough for what this place actually was, and what sort of world history took place in this very room here. And Professor Kastler says that he's been involved with this room for about 30 years in all sorts of different jobs that he was having here in this courthouse. And the interest of the public in this courthouse actually only sort of sprang up in the 1980s. So the first generation was not very much interested in what took place in the IMT, but it was sort of the second generation that started to be interested in what happened here after the war. The room here is for murder trials. Okay, so this is for really grave crimes. You have the accused actually sitting over there, just on the same spot where Goering and the others sat, and the prosecutor sitting over here. And then you'll have witnesses just being asked to sit here right in front. So. But this is now for tonight, this is the translator. And human rights, I mean, this is only because the Nuremberg trials took place here. This is the responsibility that the city of Nuremberg feels, and it takes this as one of, the most important aims that the city has now, to promote human rights.
Es gibt ja auch diesen Menschenrechtspreis alle 2 Jahre.
We have a prize. The city of Nuremberg hands out a prize, in particular for people who have achieved great things in the protection and promotion.
Okay. Yeah. That's all we need.
Passing the Congress Hall, which has been planned for the assembly of 50,000 political leaders, and which was meant to be used just for one day in the year. Yes. Day of the party rallies, and it was meant that this huge building should be used just for this one day. It was forbidden to the city of Nuremberg to make plans to use it for any other occasion. So it is a certain sign of decency, which you can easily imagine. Now we have here an open yard, which should have become a hall, of course, Whatever you see here is just half of the plans. The huge horseshoe-shaped building would have got 20 more meters, and to speak would have been at the crossroad on the back. We will pass it again, here, right where we're passing through right now, there would have been stalls and seatings for, as I said, 50,000 political leaders. Now, the foundation stone for this building, or for the remnants of this building here, was laid in 1935 during the party rally. It was the infamous one where the racial laws were proclaimed. Construction work was a bit difficult because we have muddy or swampy ground here. The craftsmen were needed for other purposes. And since that time, this building here stands as it is, unfinished and without any real purpose. In this, Nuremberg is a unique place concerning Nazi architecture. Not in the meaning that there isn't any other Nazi architecture in other German towns. For example, in Berlin, there's the airport Tempelhof, which got to be famous by the airlift, or the Olympic Stadium, or the Haus der Kunst in Munich, and many, many more. And our financial minister is sitting on the chair of Hermann Göring in the former Ministry of the Air Forces. Barracks could be used without any loss in continuity. For example, 400 yards to the left or to the west, is a huge former SS barracks which was used by the American forces until 1992, without the fear of becoming infiltrated by Nazi ideology. But that's the difference. All these buildings had a function, while these backstages for a huge dramatic self-presentation. Nuremberg had been proud, of course, to deliver this huge area to the and they had a certain tradition because there were already 4 party rally mass assemblies in the year before 33, when the Nazis gained power, and 2 of them in 27 and 29 took place in Nuremberg. And this is why the decision was made to perform all later party rallies here in Nuremberg, because Hitler did have a very positive memory or remembrance of those events here. It was not the only reason, of course. The other reason was that Nuremberg, though being the grandstand of the Zeppelin Field, which is just a square mass assembly place, giving place for some 120,000 men, which used to stand and parade here, surrounded by some 70,000 spectators. And the more prominent visitors or spectators were assembled here on the grandstand, on the steps here. The centerpiece used to be flanked by 2 rows of pillars, which were blown up in 1967. Finished in 1937. Maybe most of you do have a very famous film footage in mind. The Americans conquered or entered Nuremberg in 20th of April in 1945. It was a very ambitious plan, and while there was still fighting in the outskirts of Nuremberg, they had their first victory parade here on the Zeppelin Field, and afterwards, 2 days later, they blew up the huge swastika which was placed on the centerpiece of the grandstand. Well, if you don't mind, I would like to invite you just to go and have a look from the place where Hitler used to stand and to address
Now they've built a big sports stadium over here.
They're trying to disguise it.
But this had a natural bunker back.
Okay, let me just have some words on the Zeppelin Field. As I said, it was the only part of the ambitious plans for the party rally grounds which was really newly built and finished. It was completed in 1937, and until all the other places were not finished, most of the events, most of the party mass assemblies, they took place here. For example, the assembly of the Reichsarbeitsdienst, of the labor service, or of the Wehrmacht, or the political leaders with the famous light dome. Perhaps you have pictures in mind. This assembly was held in the evening due to the very often ugly shape of many of the political leaders. They had become really fat, and that's why Hitler wanted to hide them in the dark. So they were put here on the ground in the late night, and 120 very strong electrical beams were placed around the field, and at a sudden the lights went on and impressed most of the people, most of the visitors. The British ambassador Henderson wrote of a cathedral of ice. In fact, also this idea was no real original creation of the Nazis. It was first used by the staff of an American artillery battalion for a farewell party of their commander in 1931 or something like that. So what? And there is always a polarity in each mass assembly, in each place the Nazis used. A polarity with Hitler, the Führer, on one side, and the people's community on the other side. And the people community existing of hundreds of thousands of people just being part of an ornament. No, not being an individual, but just being reduced to an ornament. I have just been asked whether there are more documentation centers in Germany on the explanation of Nazi history. Of course, there are lots of them. There is a whole network. The first ones, of course, were all the memorials, 2 kilometers long, 60 meters wide, so that 40 men, armed forces, could comfortably walk just one beside the other. This parade strip was completed in 1939, but never came into use. The party rally in 1939 had the slogan "Party Rally of Peace." Each party rally used to have a certain slogan: Party Rally of Victory, Party Rally of Labor, and so on. And in 1939 we did have the Party Rally of Peace, and it was cancelled on the 26th of August with a small press note, but giving no reasons for the cancellation. We know why now, because on the 1st of September the Germans marched into Poland and the Second World War was on its way. Now, the Great Road, the big road, if you have maybe some of you have a look straight on forward, and far in the back you can see the shapes of the imperial castle. It was made by intention, because this great road visually should lead to the old city of Nuremberg, and a propaganda ideological connection was constructed between the city of the party rallies and the city of the imperial dials. I mean, the emperors used to have assemblies here as well in the medieval ages, when Nuremberg was a most famous town, and as the Nazis said, die deutscheste aller deutschen Städte, the most German of the German city. I always wonder how a thing or how a place or how a man can be more German than German. Somehow it's a bit threatening, especially thinking of the time of the Nazis.
Are these bleachers along the,
They are spectators. Could have stood to view the parade. On the right hand side ahead of us you can see the Congress Hall again, and you can easily the sheer size, the huge dimensions, the rectangularity, and the symmetry. These are the most visible characteristics. All others was taken either from Roman architecture, as in the case of the Congress Hall, or from the Greeks, as it has been the case with the Zeppelin grandstand. When you see pictures in the exhibition, you will note a certain similarity to the Pergamon altar, but the Pergamon altar is a bit more handy and more beautiful, really.
Hey.
In the documentation center itself, you find a small guidebook, which is for your own service, for your own information, and of course, after that you will get an audit. You did have a special welcome there as well. But I have to say that this is not the usual procedure. Though the city of Nuremberg and the Palace of Justice and the court try to do their very best to pay attention to the fact that the courtroom 600 has much higher sensibility in the attention of foreign visitors than it used to have in Germany itself. In Germany, just the building is used like every day, and for years it was not recognized that the combination between this historic site and the fact that the milestone and the development of law was laid at the side of the people of Nuremberg and Germany as well. We have here a historic view of the building. We have an aerial view of late 1945. We can see the Palace of Justice, the East Wing, the courtroom 600, and the prison where the main accused, but also many of the testimonies like us, were kept. Of all people who were engaged in this trials, in this process, maybe to deliver the idea, they need to find persons or help to establish this not documentation center or service center for the people. There are similar cases like that. For example, there is one room which was used just for a couple of hours where the capitulation was exploited both ideologically and propaganda. You can see it here. We have this wonderful town where the eagle nestles and places itself the leaders. The Zeppelin Field for the labor service, the stadium for the Hitler Youth, the March Field for the presentations of the army, and the German stadium for the paramilitary games. And the rest, the Great Road, the parade strip, we went there by the bus, and the tent camps for the participants. Right, this is what it would have looked like. This was the Louis Gold Arena, the Congress Hall, the Zeppelin Field, the Great Road, the German stadium, the March Field, and the tent camps behind. And this is what it looks like today. We have seen already the remnants which are still visible today and covering about some 4 square kilometers. It's the Louis Gold, the Congress Hall, Zeppelin Field, the Great Road, and the small lake where the stadium used to be. Now we are here in the Congress Hall, and you can also see that we are just wagging the dog, just being in a very small part of this huge building. It takes you some 15 minutes to walk from one end to the other. It became clear that due to the 950th anniversary of Nuremberg in the year 2000, a small exhibition in the grandstand would not be enough to explain the dark history of Nuremberg in those 12 years of Nazi tyranny. And this is why this documentation center was planned. It was planned, developed, and done within just 4 years with the help of the government and the Free State of Bavaria. It is now a museum of the city of Nuremberg.